My name is Bailey Steckbauer, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our presentation, When the Living is Removed from Living Learning Communities. So Sydney and I wanted to give you a little, who are we? I am a 6-year coordinator at East Carolina University, and over the last 6 years, I have worked with living learning communities every single year and in the variety of buildings that I have lived in. I currently supervise about 8 living learning communities on campus.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sydney Roig. I'm a 3rd-year residence hall coordinator here at ECU as well. And I oversee a building that houses about 8 living learning communities, similar to Bailey's. And so together we actually oversee about 16 of our LLCs on campus, which is kind of the majority of our communities on campus. So it's pretty exciting. We kind of have a unique experience because our residence halls are actually connected with a bridge. So our living learning community residents can actually interact with each other throughout both buildings. And Bailey and I have a very collaborative experience in creating a community with our 2 buildings as well. So,
yeah. So we figured we'd start off this morning by being interactive with a poll everywhere. So as I'm going to transition my screen, these are some of the questions in preparation that we'll be asking you, but this number here, you're going to text Bailey Steck, what is that? B644 to 3760. I'm gonna pull up my other screen here for us.
okay, so someone asked, what are you defining as remote LLCs? I guess so any community, if you have a living learning community where the students who normally live together are either like a hybrid, some are living on campus, some aren't, or if none of your students are living together this year.
All right. It looks like we have about a mix right now of both remote and not remote living learning communities. All right. Okay, so more living learning communities are looking that they are actually maybe living together on campus compared to on campus. All right, I'm gonna move us to our next question, which is what challenges are you facing with your LLCs this year? And feel free, you can type multiple responses to this question. So definitely engagement, programming, I think like creativeness, how everything's virtual, motivation, maybe feeling discouraged and that fatigue, lack of experiences for what LLCs traditionally have, increased difficulties, lack of participation, budget challenges. I see a lot of budget challenges. I think that is definitely huge and has impacted a lot of us as well. Well, thank you for engaging. I have one more question for you. And that is if there's anything that you hope to gain from this session for Sydney and I, and hopefully to chat with your peers afterwards. Definitely. What are we looking for in the future? New ideas, creative strategies. How can we make our experiences more robust? Not overloading the hall staff that might be implementing it. Creative online engagements. See what's working for others. Other suggestions, best practices. Absolutely. Virtual engagement. Well, hopefully by today, you'll have some new ideas or new strategies. And so we look forward to continuing with you this morning. I'm gonna go back to.
All right, so Bailey and I wanted to share just our kind of an overview of what our goals are for today's program session. And so we wanted to examine the role of living learning communities when students are not physically living together. And we did see the poll to see how many people were having that experience, and that a few of you did. We here at ECU, definitely most of our living learning community students are not living with us on campus this year because of the pandemic. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that, what that looks like here. We wanted to reflect on the work and purpose of living learning communities during a pandemic. We also wanted to discuss what experiences we are now providing to our first year students at ECU. Much of the participation for LLCs for our students here are by first year students. So what does their experience look like? How is that different this year in addition to being in an LLC? And finally, wanted to brainstorm new ideas to incorporate for the future in our housing program. So maybe we had to be creative this year and develop some different strategies to connect LLC students, and what from those can we utilize for the future, past the pandemic. So we'll have an opportunity to share that and to hear from you all as well about those things.
All right, so I wanted to give you a little context of what living learning communities are like here at ECU. So primarily our LLCs are led by our academic partners or faculty members. We only have about 3 that are in-house led by campus living ourselves. So we have really strong partnerships, and a lot of the onus falls on the academic partners to create what the living learning community experience should be. So our students take 2 classes with one another in the fall and take 1 class with one another in the spring semester. We have co-curricular and curricular activities that are outlined throughout the entire academic year for them. We really focus on providing academically supportive environments as well as socially supportive environments. Our LLC students have some of the most resources available to them on campus through their programs, their connection to faculty and with hall staff, and have additional leadership opportunities available to them as well. So Sydney and myself really serve as liaisons for the in-hall staff and support and the direct contact with the students too.
So we kind of wanted to share a little bit about the structural impacts that we've experienced here at ECU because of the pandemic. And this kind of has impacted our ability to operate some of our living learning communities. So overall, on our campus, we experienced many shutdowns and reopenings. So first happening in the spring when things with the pandemic first started to develop, our students were actually on spring break, and we decided to have them stay at home after that point. And so our campus almost kind of shut down completely at that point. And then we welcomed students back to campus in the fall. We were at almost full capacity. Students had roommates, things like that. And within about 2 weeks, we had to shut down again. We were starting to see clusters of positive test results across multiple buildings and things like that. So we reached the threshold where we had to kind of move to remote learning. But we did allow students to apply for an exception to remain on campus. And if they were granted that, then they were able to move to a centralized location on campus, move into a single room, and follow our expectations for COVID guidelines and things like that. Slowly, we started to welcome more students back to campus. So we had like block A and B for the fall semester. By block B, we welcomed a few hundred more students. And then this spring, we opened up with about 1,800 students total, when we normally house about 5,900. So that's where we're at now, with many of our students that are living off campus from the living learning communities. Students who normally would live in the same building are all kind of spread across campus when they move to single rooms and those things. So our LLC students are kind of in different places than where they normally are in the same building. We also experienced a lot of budget cuts. We eventually had to lose our RA staff at the beginning of last semester, and then we moved to lose all of our student staff in the department in general. And so without that student support, a lot of the responsibilities kind of fell on to us as coordinators to keep things going. But then we also were experiencing some full-time staff furloughs, which applied to the coordinators as well. So, without the normal hall staff, our full presence, really the onus of LLC engagement fell almost completely on the academic partner to kind of keep up engagement for our living learning community students.
So we faced a lot of challenges, as I'm sure many of you have as well. So overall challenges is our living learning community students are residing off campus. If they are residing on campus, their community of what they thought the living learning community was has vastly changed with new residents or community members on their floor. But there's also the challenge of moving to certain different locations as well. And so we wanted to help our living learning communities a lot. And so our partners responded to really having to learn how to engage with students more virtually. So we as hall coordinators provided a lot of support to our residents as well as the academic partners. I think one of our pride and joys, which we're going to highlight a bit later, is our centrally programmed virtual events for all living learning community students. And then really working to onboard our students that were displaced to now live back together in the community in which they originally were in.
So when we started working on this program presentation, Bailey and I really wanted to get input and feedback from our academic partners who run and lead our living learning communities, as well as our living learning community students themselves. So we developed two surveys, one for our academic partners and one for our students. And I wanted to highlight a little bit about how our academic partner interview went. These are the 8 questions that we asked them. It really focused on what new initiatives they've led this year to sustain engagement in the living learning communities. How did they adapt with virtual components? How are things different this year? What are their participants doing differently? What do they believe their students' experience to be this year? Do they believe they're meeting the needs of their LLC students, and how have their goals changed this year? And then what might they incorporate that they've learned this year for the future success of living learning communities for years to come? That's really was our kind of main focus, was to see what new things came out of this that can be adopted for the future. And so we wanted to share their answers as well and highlight some of those new things. So while they did kind of bring up a lot of the challenges that Bailey highlighted earlier, we kind of wanted to share a little bit about what are the successes that they've adopted. And so they were really pushed to be creative with their use of technology and social media. And with the world as it is now, I think even beyond a pandemic, this engagement they found to be really successful, and they have talked about utilizing it again in the future. They've planned more engaging activities, including the utilization of outdoor spaces, kind of having to get creative in terms of how to gather and what that looks like. They focused on the spread of more positive messaging in the living learning communities than we have in the past. And so they hosted a couple of programs we've highlighted here, one called You've Been Booed, where they shared kind of like a reverse trick-or-treating, where they shared little bags of treats and notes for their students in the community. And we also had an initiative called Positive Post-it Notes that were students could write down encouraging messages to one another and place it all throughout the hall. So kind of some more passive engagement that they focused on this year that was really successful. They shared about their need for authentic opportunities to learn and interact between their students because they're not able to meet in person. Like, how does that look now? So one of those things is that they started meeting students earlier in the summer months. So once they knew which students would be participating in the living learning communities, they set up some virtual meetings to start the interaction and building that community before starting school. And so even though they did this because of the pandemic to start thinking about how to, build relationships when they're not together, they found this to be really successful and want to utilize this again in the future to kind of build in that community before even arriving to campus. They share that their processes for achieving their goals have changed. Obviously, that makes sense. And finally, they did highlight the need for mental health and wellness check-ins with their living learning community students, a lot of one-on-ones to make sure that they were doing all right. And obviously, mental health crises have been on the rise in higher education in general, but obviously particularly since the pandemic started. And so they talked about how this could be even more useful to incorporate in the future as well beyond the pandemic.
Yeah. So we interviewed our living learning community students as well. And the questions that we asked them were really ways of how are they describing their experience in the LLC this year. We wanted to know what they felt like they were gaining. We wanted to hear what challenges they were facing, what positive components they felt that they had compared to their peers in the living learning community. We asked for them to describe how they're connected with other members. And part of our living learning communities, most all of them have a mentor or returning student. So we asked that question as well to our mentors and returning students of what has changed for their experience and what have they learned and grown from this. So overall, they mentioned that they are feeling connected through the 2 classes that they're taking. They have found students that have similar interests to them. They have created group chats and social media platforms to stay in touch besides the pandemic, keeping people apart. And they have felt, even though they are virtual from all over, they have this this built-in set of friends. And these 2 points to me really highlight what I think the meat of a living learning community is and what we get from living learning communities every single year, not only in a global pandemic of us being virtual and apart. So I thought that was really nice to highlight that they're still achieving our goals and outcomes that we set year to year. Some other aspects that we wanted to pull out was our students reflected on learning more self-discipline for themselves because all classes were online and they're learning how to communicate with one another better. And that is through their social media platforms or even really forcing themselves to communicate in the hallways or when they see other people in the building as we're working to keep gatherings apart and distant. And then our mentors and returning students highlighted how they've developed better mentorship skills through support, through check-ins, through leadership and knowing campus resources, mostly because they felt more ownership this year to provide their first-year students the best experience possible and really give them what does their first year living in a residence hall or on ECU's campus feel like, and what is it, and what do they need to know. Some of that was more filled in by the resident advisors from the past, and so they've sort of stepped in to really show more support and mentorship than before. So with all of that, some of the best practices that we wanted to highlight and hopefully you can take away or think about for your institutions is our department, Sydney, myself, as well as our assistant director for Living Learning Communities, created virtual pop-up programs. And these events were open to all Living Learning Community students. They were sent out and advertised through their academic partners, as well as us as coordinators from them living in our buildings. And everybody was able to log on via a Zoom link and have an educational session that was applicable to everybody. And so we saw this as a huge benefit of keeping our LLCs connected, providing that additional support for our partners and keeping our students engaged. So our first pop-up program that we had was a faculty panel that was at the end of August, really working helping students understand what to expect from their online classes and how to continually interact and build relationships with faculty in this virtual world that they're in.
Our second session focused on career skills. So we invited our career services office to come in virtually and host a session where they talk about kind of what services they offer, kind of bringing that to the students and sharing some tips and information on what skills that students should be working on to prepare for their careers, after college. And so we found that to be a really helpful session because, students might not be visiting that office this year or think to visit that office. And so we wanted to kind of provide them that experience.
Yeah, our third session was music therapy, which helped address our overall wellness, stress, component for what our students were facing. And so we partnered with some professors in our School of Music to talk about music therapy in small ways in which our residents could adapt this into their daily practice and their lives for overall success.
Our fourth session there was called The Escalation of Assumptions, Stereotypes, and Microaggressions. And this was a very interactive session where students learned how to recognize and counteract implicit biases and further contribute to a campus that is welcoming and inclusive. So really providing them with some practical and tangible steps and strategies towards making and building a more inclusive community on campus.
Mm-hmm. We also brought in our study abroad office. We're a highly regional institution and a lot of students face hardships to go to study abroad or scared about study abroad. And so we brought the study abroad office to them to help them understand how they can include this in their academic endeavors and what opportunities are available to them from financial aid to different experiences that might just be a 2-week trip to a semester.
And then our final pop-up session was hosted by the Writing Center. We have a really awesome Writing Center on campus, and their staff kind of shared a little bit about what services that they offer in their office and how to utilize those services, how to make an appointment. And then they kind of shared a lot of tips on how to write successful papers in college, a lot about those writing skills that they can utilize in any of their classes or any of their careers that they may go into.
Mm-hmm. So the virtual pop-up programs are what we did centrally to help support our communities. And then 2 specific LLCs that I wanted to highlight was the Honors College. And they did a great job of utilizing outdoor spaces that we already have on campus this semester. So instead of doing traditional programming, they sort of had Friday afternoons on the lawn in which they encourage all their residents to come out with a blanket, or they had raffles for tailgating chairs for people to sit outside to communicate with one another and to also have resources. So they had their advisors and professors, and each Friday afternoon had a different theme for them, but they really utilized green space outside to connect with their participants who were on campus. Then our nursing living learning community used a project that they created in class fall semester. And part of the project was having students come up with what their intention is for their academic career and what their intention is personally for this upcoming year. And so then our nursing academic partner took the students' responses from their academic papers and created bags in which the students were able to create a tangible bracelet called sort of like the My Intent bracelets. And they were able to see their My Intent on the wrist, and they were able to create their own bracelets to remind them of their passions, their purpose, and why they're here pursuing their education. So I thought those were two really cool, once again, more passive, less involved programs, but things that could easily be replicated.
All right, so, I know we shared a lot about things that we've done at our institution, but I know things look very different at, different institutions. We've all experienced kind of unique challenges. So we kind of wanted to open up the floor to hear from you all. Whoever feels comfortable sharing. We just put the questions up here, but we don't have to follow them, strictly. We just wanted to hear maybe some best practices that you found when you've been creative this year with your communities. If you did anything that was very successful virtually, sharing that potentially. In what ways have connections been maintained this year? How has that changed? And then maybe any innovative ideas to improve LLCs for the future that you might have as well. So we kind of wanted to hear from your perspective how things were going on that front. And then Bailey and I are also happy to answer any questions and clarify anything that you all may be wondering as well about our experience. So we'll open up the floor. Anyone can kind of just jump in. If you put something in the chat, we can read that as well.
I can go ahead. Hi, Bailey. So something that I was really excited to bring to Florida State, I am over the Music LLC and the Women in STEM LLC. And so what I decided to do was create a Hall Council LLC liaison position for both of the LLCs. And that was a really great way that I've noticed that my students can have more connection and bring it back to me as the Hall Council advisor. So like, for me, we're very specific, but like we have practice rooms in our residential area for the Music LLC. And one of the concerns that was brought up was they were looking to have time extended because now with COVID, you can't really practice in your room as much. Because you're fighting with your roommate about who can have the space for an exam or who can use it to practice and things like that. So that LLC liaison position has been really awesome. And I think that it has opened up my eyes to a lot more of the student perspective that, you don't necessarily get just from talking with them.
Thanks, Caitlin, for sharing. It's good.
I had a question for Bailey and Sydney or anyone else in the group. So I'm curious to know if this year is resulting in any type of renegotiating what the agreements are between your housing department and the academic partners. Because I will say I'm at UNC and some of our academic partners came through, but others were in similar positions as our staff were, that they just didn't have the time. Most of our LLCs ended up going inactive for the year because 95% of the students left and again, left campus. We kept some of our identity-based groups going, but all of these changes have just really brought us to the point of the opportunity to renegotiate. And I'm curious to know if others are taking advantage of the same thing. And if so, like, what kinds of things are you asking for that are different than how they were before?
So that is a great question. I know that is something we look at every year. I know the partners and us as Campus Living, we kind of look at the agreements each year and revisit that to see what new expectations we can kind of identify. I don't know that we've started that process yet this year, but I would love to hear what others, if they have done that, what things that you've looked at, like you said, what new things to kind of incorporate have you found? So I don't know, Bailey, if you know of anything that we've done.
No, I know that there's been a lot of negotiation of numbers and participants as we're looking for this upcoming academic year, as they're maybe not as likely to fill all their spaces as they have before. So I know that that has been about, but beyond that, I am not 100% sure. I would say, like, if I could think like a touch base points for the students and really having those check-ins as we see that they can be easier. Instead of having the student go to their office, they can have virtual meetings and more support virtually. And so maybe incorporating that and keeping this, I see a virtual connection as a continual thing as we move through the years to come. Any others that have questions or want to share some things that they've done on their campuses? Libby.
Hi, I work with the Living Learning Communities at Eastern Kentucky University. And I wanted to share kind of an innovative practice that our education LLC moved forward with, and it is entirely the academic partner's idea. I take no credit for it. She was new this year, and she's a new faculty member who was hired in August, and and she just jumped into the role. She didn't get to pick whether or not she wanted to be an LLC partner. The department, the education department just assigned her, but I am so glad they did because she's been wonderful. And what she has done is that she's developed connections with, we're fortunate to have a model school on our campus. And she developed connections with the K through 6 educators over there. And so our education LLC has obviously not had much chance for COVID safety to gather or to do any of like the classroom observations or the things that they would normally really love to do. And so she has developed a pen pal program in which the education LLC students are communicating with some students in the model school who have been identified by their teachers as needing some additional reading and writing support. And I think that has been really successful. Our LLC students really, really love it. They're really passionate about it. And even though they're not gathering to do it, I think it's still very tied to the mission of the LLC and to building community and getting them engaged in their major. So
that was really awesome.
Cindy, Bailey, I have a question for you all. You mentioned that your students had connected and said that they felt like they had that built-in network of connections and things, despite not being all in the same place with the living and learning. Do you all foresee, or what impact do you think that kind of the experience that they're having this year is going to have on LLCs next year, either recruitment or kind of that like feeling of, well, we can do this without being in the same building, so now we don't want to be in the same building? Like, where do you think that might go for your students?
That is a good question. I feel like that living component will still be missed. I don't know that we've like been so successful that students will say, we don't want to live together. But I mean, we're happy to see that they were able to make those connections. I feel like, I don't know, maybe like a hybrid situation where, you know, the students who may be more maybe introverted or less inclined to kind of walk down the hall to talk to someone may feel a little bit more confident in connecting with people through a virtual platform. And so maybe incorporating that as a part of our plan. I don't know what you think, Bailey.
Mhm. Yeah, I think our students are still craving the connections. And so I would assume that we're still going to have some interest in them and students still wanting to live together in the same floors and communities. I think spring semester, when we were bringing more students back, they were really trying to live closer to those that were still in the LLC communities. So I think that is a shining light for us, that living learning communities are still going to succeed over time and have the benefit of living in close proximity with one another. I think we really just wanted to share that although distant, our academic partners and the students, I think a lot of the onus has been put on the students to maintain a community or create the communities that they're looking for. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah, I also think too, like what the faculty mentioned in their survey and the students, that they both felt like the early, you know, reaching out early virtually before students arrived at campus really helped students feel like that community was already created, that set of friends was already built in. And so I feel like they would still incorporate that virtual piece that way for the future as well. So it's kind of cool to see that we've kind of found new options to connect. I don't know.